This is a conversation in the frame of the Space Renaissance conversations about the future of civilization in 200 years from now. I am Adriano Utino, President of Space Renaissance International, and you are Al Globus. You are a blogger and an expert of what we call the new space and space advocacy since many years. So can you briefly introduce yourself, just a few words?
Hi, I'm Al Globus. I work for San Jose State University at NASA Ames Research Center. I have been interested in space settlement since 1978 and have worked in that field off and on in the entire interval. Now, the biggest things I've done are founding the Space Settlement Contest, the NASA Ames Space Settlement Contest for kids. We had 6,000 kids enter the contest. Each individual or group designed a space settlement or wrote a paper related to space settlement or something like that. And the other contribution I've made to space settlement is very recently discovered in the last couple of years that some of the things that we had believed about building space settlements were not true. We believed that you couldn't launch the materials from Earth. There was just too much of it. And it turns out that that's simply not the case. It was believed for a long time that you couldn't rotate it more than 1 or maybe 2 rotations per minute. Rotation is used in space settlements to give artificial gravity, so your kids will drop their phones. And it turns out that's not true. 3 or 4 or 5 RPM is okay. And it was believed that anywhere you went in space, the radiation levels were extremely high and you needed enormous amounts of shielding. It turns out there is one place in space where that's not true. And we are discovering through more recent work, and this has to be nailed down, that we always believed we could fit the life support in there somewhere without too much trouble. And it turns out that may not be true at all. Fitting the life support into the system may be extremely difficult.
I have to ask you to talk a little bit slower for the sake of a better understandability of everything.
Got it.
Fine. However, I think you read something about how this conversation have origin, because I took my idea from the work of James Corey. James Corey is a writer of science fiction, well, it is not a single writer, but there are 2 that are writing with this pseudonym of James Corey, and they wrote several books, very very nice science fiction books, and I say that these are modern science fiction. I mean they are post-dystopian science fiction, because I maintain that we suffered 40 years of dystopian science fiction, especially in movies, where science and technology were presented as the evil, that destroyed the nature, etc., etc., etc. So since a few years, maybe we are going out of this new obscurantist age. And I think James Corey work is one of the of the works that can be maybe seen in this new age of futuristic literature. So a TV series was made on the basis of these books. The title is The Expanse, and it is distributed on Netflix. So the scenario, very very briefly, is this one. We are 200 years from now. The humanity colonized the solar system, more or less. So there is a government on Mars. Mars is the second superpower. Earth and Mars are the superpowers, and there is an alliance of it is called Alliance of the External Planets, APE, and it is not quite a government, it's more a sort of anarchist frontier alliance of all the people living on the small moons, on small planetoids, and on the moons of Jupiter, Ganymede, Ceres, etc., etc. So this is the scenario, and in this scenario, the history is developed. But okay, the history then in the movies is more like let me say a bit space western, you know, with the wars and then violence and then this kind of things. But what I was interested is that from the social point of view, I think in 200 years, so this is my basic question. In 200 years, if the high frontier was opened and civilization expanded to Mars and to the moons of Jupiter and beyond, some positive social effects should be perceived in this new situation. Because if we say that we are almost 8 billion people in the closed system of our planet, and we need to open the frontier in order to open the horizon to development and to give hope to the people and all this kind of thing. We are saying this thing. We space advocates are saying this thing. We as Space Renaissance are saying these kind of things, and we updated our analysis in our last Congress in October of 2016. So if we think that after 2 centuries, having opened the frontier, how can we have 30 billion people on Earth, most of them unemployed? This is the first question. So does it mean that opening the frontier, maybe civilization just assured its continuation without any improvement, any social improvement? So, well, let me say that for me, this would be enough. I mean, as a space advocate, I maintain that civilization needs to expand into space to continue. So if it will continue exactly as it is with all our problems, etc., I will be happy. Because the alternative is to have an implosion in the closed system and to have a premature extinction of the civilization, if not of the species. Therefore, for me, it will be enough. But I would like to understand, discussing with you and others futurists, what we can imagine that will be the social situation in 200 years if the frontier were open, and if we have, of course, an industrial growth, because you have to build the spacecrafts, where you have to build infrastructures, you have to build a lot of things. So a lot of new jobs will be created, a lot of new just think about the internet. What did it mean in terms of new works that were generated?
Can I get a word in edgewise?
Sorry?
Can I get a word in edgewise here? Can I get a word in edgewise here? Because I'd like to respond to several things that you said.
Yeah, sure. Okay? Yes. I'm always talking too much, so please.
First of all, the notion that the settlement will be primarily on planets and moons, in my view, is wrong. Most settlement, the vast majority of the population, will almost certainly, in my view, live in extremely large spacecraft, kilometer scale in the time frame that you're talking about, in 200 years. And the reason for that is simple. When your kids grow up, they will grow up strong, because you're rotating, because if you have settlement in space, you can rotate and get artificial gravity. You can't do that on a moon, and you can't do that on Mars or a planet. Right? Now, maybe it'll turn out.
Are you talking about the difference of gravity and
Yes.
physiological differences?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, we don't. Now, maybe it will turn out that the kids will be fine, okay, living on Mars or the moon, but only as long as they stay there, right? Or go to some place with a lower gravity. Because if you've grown up and you're 20 or 30 or 40 years old and you've lived at 1/6 G on the moon, say, you're not going to be able to go to Earth. Who are you kidding? You're not even going to be able to go to Mars, right? That's one reason. The second reason is that the resources available in the solar system, the easiest ones to get to and exploit are the asteroids, not planetary surfaces. Asteroids are easier to get to. They're closer.
Yeah, sure.
And there's an awful lot of them.
Yes, okay. Yes. They're working on that.
The first point is when you want to talk about settlement, be sure to include. I'm sure people will live on Mars. I'm sure people will live on the moon, and so forth and so on. But they'll live in orbital space settlements and free space settlements first, because it's easier, much easier. And ultimately, the vast majority of the population will be in them because you get much more surface area. If you take Ceres, one asteroid, and you tear it apart, and you turn it into space settlements, you get at least 100 times the surface area of the Earth. All the moons and rocky planets together don't have that much living area. Okay. So that's the first thing. The second thing is with regard to dystopian sci-fi. Sci-fi books are essentially all novels. They're dramas. They're not comedies. Okay? Almost everything you read is going to be either a comedy or a drama, and sci-fi is almost always a drama. Every once in a while, you get some good comedy, like in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Universe. That's rare. To have a good drama, you need conflict.
Yeah,
if we create a beautiful future, okay, if you try to write a book about a beautiful future where everything is really wonderful, nobody will read it.
Because it's boring. It is boring.
So it is inherent. You in order to have a story, you have to have conflict. And if you're in sci-fi, that conflict somehow needs to derive typically from the world that the author has created. Right. So it doesn't worry me that we have a lot of dystopian sci-fi. That's fundamental to the nature of storytelling. What you can hope for is that the good guys win in the end. And that seems to be happening.
No, but Ming, sorry, just a small precision on this point. Okay, even in the histories written by Heinlein and Asimov and Branner and Ursula Le Guin and all the, let me say, the past century science fiction writers that I'm sure you read, because for sure you read everything like I did. They were telling stories with conflicts. Okay.
Yes.
But the name itself of science fiction means that science was considered a value, a big value in the old science fiction. Okay, yeah, it was a naive view for many aspects, of course, but from the last quarter of the past century up to now, we had another kind of what I call a dystopian science fiction. Is the science fiction that kept on telling us about the planet destroyed, post-nuclear and post this and post that. And always science and technologies were seen as very bad, because the concept was that human intelligence is bad. Because if you try to improve from the natural status, if you try to improve, you make worse. So it's better you let it be. You let nature do what she wants, and we are just animals like the other animals. So
I have a point on that. I have a point on that.
This was.
We are completely natural.
We are
And
natural, yes,
I
of
would even,
course.
I would even argue, and I include in that, by the way, our intelligence and our technology and so forth. And here's why. What life does is it expands. Every species tries to expand. They always succeed, and the species that don't expand, they go extinct.
Yes, yes. No,
Okay.
I
Now hold
agree
on a
with you.
second.
I agree with you. I agree with
Now,
you. We are
now
natural.
wait a second. In order, the dinosaurs did great. The dinosaurs were around for tens of millions of years. They were
Yeah,
very, very, very successful.
yeah,
But because they were not capable, they're not spacefaring, they were wiped out.
yeah.
It is not, I believe, an accident that in the recovery from the disaster that befell the dinosaurs, that a spacefaring species should come along.
Yeah.
I think that this is Gaia's way of expanding. You can't expand on the planet. Everything is taken. You can jostle for position, right? But you can't really expand. There's very few places on Earth that are abiotic. A few, but not many. So if you're going to keep expanding, if you do what life does, you have to go off planet. That means you need a spacefaring species, at least one. And we are it. And that, I would argue, is completely and totally natural. It is not, it's not an accident at all. I think it is fundamentally how life is recovering from the dinosaur disaster.
Yes, sure. No, I completely agree with you. We are natural. Our intelligence is part of nature, is not another thing. So we are behaving our, let me say, natural impulse to explore and to go outside and to expand in greater niches. This is natural. But there was, let me say, an anti-human and anti-natural culture or subculture in the past 30, 40 years that tried to keep us closed, philosophically closed, because they say that intelligence is bad, and then we don't have to try to go outside, and we don't have to try to make to improve our status, and we don't have to try because we make worse. This was that is why I'm talking about dystopian science fiction, and that maybe we are
I'm not familiar with that. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that literature. I haven't read it. It doesn't interest me very much. It should be pointed out that ants fight monumental wars. I mean, involving hundreds of millions of individuals and vast slaughter of other ants. And ants, it's hard to argue that they're particularly intelligent. War is not just a feature of humanity.
Well, I think war is a behavior that comes from our animal status, because it's aggressivity and availability to kill and all these kind of things. We are trying, in my opinion, we are trying to move from our animal status to a human status, because we have an ethic, we are considering that the rights of all humans, people, to exist and to have a better future, etc., etc. These, of course, these are concepts that come from our ability to think and to reason, to think about the convenience. Do you remember an author that I love very much is Paul Anderson? He wrote The League of the Polesotechnic. Mm-hmm. The League of Polesotechnic, the Polesotechnic League. And one of the characters of these histories, that it was an entrepreneur, a space entrepreneur, called Van Dyke, maybe, and coming from the Netherlands. And he said, a corpse is not a good customer.
Yes.
So, yeah, if we want to commerce, if we want our markets to grow, if we want to progress, to have jobs, opportunities, etc., we cannot keep on killing each other. And this is not a moral. It's not a moral consideration.
The levels of violence in society are way down over the last 100, 200 years. I mean, way down.
Yes, but
they will almost certainly continue to stay way down so long as nobody pushes the nuclear button. And the reason for that is the big boys, do not want to fight each other. I mean, in
Yeah.
World War II and World War I, well, particularly World War I, it was popular. People cheered on all sides. The Brits and the French were ready to go at it with the Germans, and the French and they were ready. They wanted to fight. Okay. By the time the Second World War around, the only people who wanted to fight were the Germans. Nobody else wanted to have anything to do with it. They had to. They were dragged into it. And today, the great powers, Russia, Germany, France, England, the United States, Japan, China, India, do not want to have anything to do with fighting a war against each other. The only one that's sort of in that ballpark is Pakistan and India, and since they've gotten nuclear weapons, they haven't had a shooting war. They lob a few shells back and forth nowadays, but nothing. It's not anything like what we saw in World War II, and that's new. This is the first time in history that I know of that the big boys really just do not want to fight each other. They're happy to crush some small country, Georgia or steal Crimea or invade Iraq or something like that. Perfectly happy to invade some small country that doesn't stand a bloody chance of defending itself, but they won't take each other on.
Well, what I think in general terms, because if you analyze the situation, the particular situation, then you can find many things, many different things, contradictory, etc., etc. But if you see it in a long distance from an historical perspective, and I think 200 years should be enough distance. What we can observe is that, however, growing our number in the closed world, our aggressivity is growing because economy is going from one crisis to another one, and of course it will not retake a definite growth if we will not have new industries that take the lead. And this new industry can be only the space industry. And so the problem is that if we will not open the system, the social fear will grow up and aggressivity will grow up. And I wonder what it will be when we will be 9 billions or 10 billions if we will not be expanding at that point. It will be very, very difficult. Maybe it will not be a general conflict, a general nuclear conflict, but will be a lot of micro conflicts that will bring a society in a new middle age, maybe, or worse. And mafias will get control, etc. Because when the people is scared by the social situation, where they think that they have no job, then their children will not have a better future, what can they do? They go after a boss, is bigger, is strong, can protect them, etc. This is how the mafia control get growing up, and not.
But we're getting a long ways from space.
Sorry.
Okay, so I want to get back to what I expect the social situation to be in 200 years if we build space settlements. Okay. So that's a question that we got asked.
So my question is this. My question is this one. Coming back to the point, if we open the system and we start expanding, in 200 years, will we see some social sides of improvement? I mean, will the violence be the same? Will the how will be the employment? Yeah, it will be a hard situation in space, because space is a hard environment, of course. But will a new brotherhood maybe born?
So let me answer.
Yes, please.
Now, if you assume that we build small space settlements close to Earth in the next few decades, which is quite possible, okay. It might take as much as a century to get to the point where you need to go outside the magnetic field, Earth's magnetic field, because underneath the Earth's magnetic field, if you do it right, if you stay near the equator, you get most of your radiation protection for free.
Yeah.
And once you go outside the magnetic field, you need millions of
Then
tons.
you have a problem of protection
Big
from,
problem.
yes, yes.
So, and this on a time scale of 200 years, I would expect to see a few million people living in low Earth orbit, and a sort of a moderate-sized, maybe a small people just sort of hanging on in Mars, and I would expect to see quite a number of settlements outside the magnetic field, but probably only a few, next to asteroids. It's not that long. Now, what I would expect socially is a lot of diversity, socially and politically, because each settlement, which might have anywhere from 10,000 to a few 100,000 people for the bigger ones, is separated from every other one by hundreds or thousands of kilometers of vacuum. So they can communicate easily, and they can go back and forth, but they're really independent. Like on Earth here, if I dump CO2 into the atmosphere, Italy warms up, right? So that means you have all these interconnections between the 7 billion people on Earth. Everybody's connected by the atmosphere. In a situation where where a large part of the population, or most of the population, lives in orbit, in space, they're not, if I put more CO2 into my atmosphere, it does nothing to yours. Nothing. Absolutely no connection whatsoever. So that allows a lot of diversity. And I would expect everything from dictatorships to pure democracies, in terms of the politics. I would expect everything you can imagine in terms of social arrangements, and then some. Particularly since the people who go into space, they're going to be the people who are dissatisfied on Earth. I mean, if you have a great life on Earth, you're not going to move into space. Not in large numbers, maybe a few people here and there. So the people who are going to move on to space settlements are going to be mostly people who are in some fundamental way dissatisfied with what's going on Earth.
Will, in your opinion, will the demographic process continue on Earth, or will it be maybe more slower on Earth and be moved to space colonies? I mean, will Earth population keep on growing here on Earth, or will we grow more outside?
Well, I think eventually it will grow more outside. But the thing about population growth, population growth is slowing down. It's slowing down a lot, and it's pretty well established that once women have power over themselves, that they have, as a general rule, less than 2 children each. So you see that in Europe, you see that in Japan, you see that amongst the population, not so much, but to a certain extent in the United States, people who are already here, not the immigrants, is that the women, when they're in control, have generally fewer than 2 babies, as a general rule.
But I have
the question is, why? Sorry. I mean, is that actually suggests a problem for space settlement? If you want to have an expanding civilization in orbit, women have to have more than 2 babies each.
Yeah.
On average.
Yes, I'm sure that.
And short of turning women into property, that it's the obvious trend is for women to be more and more empowered. And so I would expect Earth's population to peak and start coming down in the next 30, 40, 50 years. And I'm actually kind of wondering what's going to happen in space settlements. I'm wondering where if we want to populate the solar system, I'm a little worried about where we're going to get the people to do it.
Look, talking about demographic process, I agree more with Julian Simon. I don't know if you read the books from John. Okay, he was a skeptic, and he wrote a book titled "Population is the last resource. Our last resource is population." So he says that humans are a value and not a problem, basically. However, I see it in a bit different this problem, because in my opinion, the only thing that stops the demographic growth is desperation and fear of the future. So when in the so-called advanced nations, the so-called post-industrial nations, where there was in this last 20, 30, 40 years fear of the future, people tend to make uh,
How many of your
less
friends,
children, less children.
friends you know well, how
But
many of your friends who you know well
look,
stopped having
just
children
a
because
moment.
they were afraid of the
I,
future? Not what you read in the newspaper, their friends. And I can tell you, my friends, none. Not one single one, as far as I can tell, stopped having babies because they were afraid of the future. They stopped having babies because there was as many babies as they wanted to have.
no, well, I don't know. I don't know.
Well, your
There could be
friends,
there could
just
be
talking about your friends.
there could be many situations and things. But
Yeah,
however,
but
for what I know, the concern about the capability to grow up these children with the uncertain economical situation, and the concern about the world in which these children will find themselves, that with the lack of jobs, etc., prevent many. So I think that this is another symptom of the what I call the syndrome of the closed world. The closed world kill love. But if the hope will have birth again, if the hope in the future, then people will start again making children, because it will be a new optimist season. And
But no,
yes,
I don't think that's why people have children. I don't think that's why they have these children. On the average, I mean, not just. I mean, some people are going to be that way.
well,
Do you know anybody in your circle of friends,
yes.
anybody who had two children that I'm so afraid of the future, everything's going to be so terrible, I'm not going to have any more children? Or did they say, I got enough children to take care of, I got to pay for college? You know?
No, yes, but it's the same
I'm
thing.
willing to bet the answer to that question is none.
It is the same
There's
thing.
not one single friend or family member of yours that quit having children because of the social, what they read in the newspaper. And if this was a major effect, I'm sure there are people who do this, okay? But I don't know any of them.
Well, however, okay.
I don't think there's very many. I don't think that's the driver in population growth. I think it's a minor effect.
Look, well, I don't know how it is in the US, but in Italy there is a big problem because many young boys and girls cannot go outside of the family because they don't have a job. So they stay. They are not able to make their own family because they don't have a steady job. They cannot take a house for themselves. They cannot go outside the home, and they live on the in many cases they live on the pension of their parents and grandparents. So this is another point, that if they don't go outside and if they don't make a family, they yes, some of them will make children, however, but in a fewer percentage. Okay, however, if you see it from a global point of view, of these processes will change, because if there will be a new economic and cultural growth, and the hope will be again in a hope in the future. I don't know. Yeah, I think you and me, we have more or less the same age. I remember in the 60s when people was working so hard because there was the progress that was pushing the television sets, the cars, all the house equipments, and people was so working hard, but they were sure that they were working for a future, for a better future. For the workers. My father was a worker in a factory, and he sent me to he allowed me to study up to not I didn't finish university because I became sorry, I started working. But if I wanted to finish the university, my father had supported me. So he was a worker in a factory. So this is such a situation very common in the 60s, because workers with their salary were allowed to support their children to study, to take a graduation.
How about in the 20s?
And now it is not so. Now,
no. What about in the 1920s? Could a worker in a factory send his kid to college?
Sorry.
What about the 1920s?
1920s.
Yeah. What about the 1920s? Could a worker in a factory in the 1920s be able to send his kid to university? Or the 1910s, or the 1890s? The answer is no. You picked out a very unusual period in our history.
Yeah.
Okay? The very unusual period. For most of history, children lived in their parents' home as a matter of course. That was normal. You would have multi-generational households, 5, 6, 2, 3, 4 generations. It wasn't like the nuclear family running off to live in their cottage. When somebody married, the woman moved into the household of the family and became part of their extended family. So, the notion of staying, I don't buy it. I don't buy the gloom and doom. I think it's just if you look at all the trends, they're almost all positive. I mean, even people, there was a time when you lost your job, you starved to death. To death. It doesn't happen today. You don't die in the streets because you lost your job. It happens occasionally, but not very often. Because there's a whole social safety net, particularly in Europe. Not so much here.
Well, okay. However, we did. It's not easy to think about in 200 years what it will be, what it will not be. However, okay, let me say that my tentative here is to understand if in 200 years, having colonized because this is the scenario of that history, that books of James Corey, having colonized the solar system, and many people lives inside the big asteroids and this kind of thing. They made houses inside, because this is a way to protect from radiation, by the way. No, if you go living inside asteroids.
Living inside asteroids probably doesn't work. Asteroids are mostly rubble piles. They're not solid. Okay, you're going to be much better off taking the materials and reforming into exactly what you want, rather than trying to
sure. But because asteroids are agglomerate of materials. They are not solid rock, basically. But there are also
some are, but most of them aren't. Yeah.
However, okay. Well, however, yes. What I would like to do is to try to make a vision of human society in 200 years. Your vision, I believe to understand, is a little bit more realistic, because you say that in 200 years we will maybe have some first colonies on Mars, and the most of the development will be in the geolunar space, in the Lagrange points maybe, and building cities in the O'Neill style, I think, more than on Kraft-Erike, because you know that discussion between Kraft-Erike and O'Neill in the 70s, because Kraft-Erike said that Kraft-Erike was all for the moon, for Selenopolis, and O'Neill was for the Lagrange colonies, big toroidal structures or cylindric structures,
or cylindrical, and also, I mean, the design, they put them at the L points, but that's that's not important. The L points were chosen to get the materials from the moon. That's why. It's not even really, it was a really good place. My recent
So
work,
what I wanted
low Earth orbit is actually
to
really
suggest. What I
that's
wanted,
where the big distance is.
what I wanted to suggest, and that I believe to understand from what you said before, that I agree that living in artificial cities will allow the rotation and therefore to generate a 1G gravity, artificial gravity. This will solve one of our physiological problems and will not force the migrants to change very quickly. Because if you begin to live on the moon at 1/6 gravity, in one generation, people will not come back to Earth if not on wheelchairs. Because,
Yeah.
So making a rotating structures, big rotating structures, we will have possibility to generate artificial gravity and to solve at least this point. The radiation is still to be properly tackled and resolved. And so I think these two big problems that are not in the history of James Corey are not. Yes, the gravity. He talks about differences, physiological differences, because the belters that they live on the asteroids and etc. They are tall and slim because they if they go to Earth, they are very weak. So he talks about this problem of difference.
Yeah, except height is mostly genetic, and in 200 years you're not going to, population's genetics aren't going to change very much unless you have very severe selection pressure. Like if you're killing off 90% of the population, then you might have enough selection pressure to get unusually tall people.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, not unless if you know if you have a 90%, you know, Jamestown, the early first successful colony the British put in North America, had a 90% fatality rate annually for the first few years it was there.
Mm-hmm.
If anything like that happens in space, we'll just stop. You know, if we send 100 colonists up and a year later 90 of them are dead, nobody's going to follow them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. So the notion that people are going to get taller in 200 years, significantly taller, maybe an inch or two, but it's not going to happen. Because height is genetic. If you have enough food, you'll attain your full height. You know, the amount of gravity doesn't really affect. I mean, maybe it does, but extremely unlikely. Anyways, go ahead.
Okay. Well, so we can say that in your vision, in 200 years, if we open the space frontier, maybe we will have, I don't know, 30 billion people living part on Earth and part outside, or less.
The population, I mean, could you build enough settlements in 200 years to house 20 billion people?
Maybe.
So
it depends. It depends.
Zero.
It is difficult to say.
And look at, here's, for instance, remember, people are ridiculously optimistic on their time frames in space. It's just absurd. You remember when the X Prize flew, right? And we were all going to be space tourists. We're going to go suborbital. It's 13 years since the X Prize was won. And the X Prize was the simplest possible space flight. Straight up, straight down. Okay?
Yeah. 13
years later, there is no company selling tickets.
No, that is space tourism. It's living in a crisis.
That's 13 years. Okay, if we are really lucky, the first space settlement that people live in might be up in 30 years. Maybe. Okay, and that's probably optimistic.
So you think that let me
20 billion people.
Let me well understand.
In 200 years, that's only 7 longer.
Let me understand. you think we will have the first, let me say, civilian settlements outside Earth when? 2030, 2050?
Well, I think if things go well, about 30 years.
30 years. So 2050, let's say.
And it'll house maybe 500 people.
Mm-hmm. 500, yeah.
Okay. So that leaves 170 years to get your next 20 billion. That doesn't, I can't imagine it. My expectation in 200 years, the population in space should probably be measured in millions or maybe tens of millions if you're lucky. So not a significant fraction of the Earth's population. Because things take a long time. Just to build, I mean, think of how long it takes to build, a major bridge. You take 10 years, easy, right? Mm-hmm. And a bridge is a lot easier to build a space settlement, and has a more ready market. So in 200 years, yeah, I would be really surprised if there was. I mean, I won't be around, but I'd be really surprised if the population was over 100 million or something. I'd have to sit down and do some thinking and some calculations, but 20 billion just sounds completely not a prayer.
So you think in 200 years we will have we could have maybe 100 million people in space?
That would be pretty optimistic. Yeah. Unless there is a caveat. Unless, suppose we decided to take half of the time and effort and money that we put into killing each other, and we're going to devote that to space settlement. Then, I don't know if we get 20 billion people up there, but it could be quite significant and very large and very quickly. But that's not going to happen. People aren't going to, if you look at the people who are advocates of space settlement, there's not very many. It's just not a lot of people. It's a couple hundred, maybe, something like that. Maybe a few thousand tops out of a population of 7 billion. And the amount of money, NASA's budget is $19 billion, but almost none of that is spent on settlement. Mm-hmm. Right? The guy who's doing the most for settlement is Elon Musk, which is, I think his company's got a budget measured in a few billion a year, which is not a lot. He's made a lot of progress too. So that's what I think. I think people tend to be very optimistic on timescales.
Yeah. Well, okay, yeah. I think almost clear what are your foreseen and your foreseeing about the future. Of course, there will be another hypothesis to say, but this will begin another conversation. What will happen if we mm-hmm. don't start settling outside Earth? If the world will remain closed, what will happen? But okay, this is a scenario I don't like to explore.
But even if the world's closed, if you look at the Earth, if you get in an airplane and you fly from Los Angeles to St. Louis, from San Francisco to St. Louis, which I did recently, the vast majority of the land between those two cities is essentially empty. There might be one house every once in a great while.
Oh yeah, no, but it's not. There's not the problem. The problem is not. The problem is not. The problem is not the space, the physical space for people to be. The problem is our development that is it is requiring more resources that are available on Earth, and more energy that is available on Earth, and more environmental goods, let me say, than what are still available on Earth. So what is the common perception is that being almost 8 billions, we already spend it. More or less, we expanded the resources of Earth, so we cannot grow more. if we don't go outside. And if we don't grow, in my opinion, if we don't grow, we will implode, because the steady status is not given in nature. There are only growing species or dying species. So the point is that in my opinion, we are near a break point, and I'm not the only one to think about that. We are near a break point, or we make an evolutionary step, or we go back.
No, but I think if you look at the archaeology history, levels of violence are way down. Wealth, individual wealth of the average person is way up. Don't forget, in the last 20 years, hundreds of millions, billions of people have moved out of dire poverty, $2 a day poverty, to the global middle class. Hundreds of millions of people have made that transition, mostly in China and India. Okay.
Oh yes.
And the levels of violence are way down. The levels of environmental awareness are way up. If you go back 100, 200 years, and you go in Europe, people didn't think two squats about the environment.
Yeah.
It wasn't like, think about it. It never crossed their mind that it would be an issue.
Oh, well, in the 50s.
The United States wiped out the passenger pigeon, almost wiped out the buffalo, and nobody even complained. It was, and the levels of environmental awareness are way up. Willingness to spend money on environmental concerns is way up. I think that we need to go into space in part because of insurance policies on Earth. But I see those as catastrophic events, like nuclear war, super volcano goes off, we get hit by a big asteroid we don't see coming, or we saw it coming too late, things like that. The general trends that I see in society overall are very, very positive.
Yeah. Okay. Al, we spent our time.
We'll do just fine to answer the question.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, we tried to give some answers. We spent our time. Right. Now it's almost 1 hour. I try to stay in 40 minutes, but it's not easy. So thank you so much for this conversation. And how can I say? We can make another conversation soon. So bye now, ad astra.
Okay, take good care.
Take care. Bye-bye.